Let's start from the president's comments at the Ghana Bar Association's conference, the latest one.
We've also taken strong systemic steps to combat corruption, rooted in a holistic program of legislative, administrative, financial, and technological reforms. We've established the Office of the Special Prosecutor, a critical institution in the fight against corruption, and we've provided it with the necessary tools to prosecute those who seek to enrich themselves at the expense of the Ghanaian people. During my first term in office, Parliament passed the Witness Protection Act in 2018, which I signed in law, to create a witness protection scheme for individuals cooperating with law enforcement, especially in corruption cases. The Critical Offences Amendment Act of 2020 elevated corruption from a misdemeanor to a felony, with harsher sentences of 12 to 25 years in prison. In addition, my administration has driven the passage of several key laws that bolster the state's ability to fight corruption. These include the Revenue Administration Amendment Act, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and Anti-Money Laundering Act, amongst others. Together, these legal reforms have strengthened the institutional framework to combat corruption and ensure accountability. The Auditor General's report for 2023, for example, revealed a significant decline in financial irregularities within the public sector, dropping by 5.2 billion cedis from the previous year, a 32% reduction. Furthermore, we have worked to reform our legal and regulatory framework to enhance transparency and accountability. We've strengthened the right to information, ensuring that Ghanaians have the tools they need to hold their government accountable. The passage of the Right to Information Act, which preceding administration had failed to accomplish, was an important milestone in this regard, providing citizens with the power to demand transparency for their leaders.
Well, joining us for a conversation on not just that, but myriad other issues, we have Adam Senanu. He's co-chair, Citizens Movement Against Corruption. We also have Dr. John Osai-Kwapong, project director and Democracy Project. We have Musa Dankwa, executive director, Global Info Analytics, and also joining the conversation via the phone lines, Professor Kobe Mensah, a political marketing strategist. All of them joining the conversation. Let me say a very good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Benjamin.
Okay, so the response is also a sound check, so I can be sure we can hear all of you. And we also have in the studio, on the other side of the studio, Sweetie Abochi, who will be with me on this conversation. So, Adam, I'll start. Adam, I don't think I heard from you. Mr. Senanu. Hello, Mr. Senanu. Okay, let's start with Dr. John Osai-Kwapong. The president specifically talks about being painted, he together with his family, being painted with the brush of corruption. From where you sit, and then he talks about misinformation, disinformation, and then he goes on to refer to the fact that he's been called a clearing agent and that it is better than being government official one. What is your take on that rhetoric, Dr. Osai-Kwapong?
Good morning to you and good morning to everybody else, Sweetie, as well. So, you know, one of the things that I've always said about this presidency and this president is the fact that I can understand and appreciate his emphasis on the law and a highly legalistic approach to fighting corruption, right? So if you look at a lot of the things that he refers to, he talks about the legal framework, the institutional framework, all the amendments to to laws, the setting up of the office of the first special prosecutor, etc., etc. And all of those things are critically important, right? You need those kinds of institutions to be able to fight corruption and fight corruption very well. But as he also points out, and as you raised, there's also been this narrative about, his administration, issues of conflict of interest, growing perceptions, of corruption. And I've always said, and I will continue to say that one of the things that, in my opinion, has hurt the president is the fact that of this strong attachment to a highly legalistic approach in fighting corruption. I mean, he would always say that, he always used to take exception to that labeling of a clearing agent. And he would always say that, look, not until you find yourself in trouble with the law, you would never appreciate due process. And that is true, right? Anytime an allegation is leveled against anyone, you want to be given all your due rights, presumption of innocence, all of those things. So he has a point there. My point of departure and respectful disagreement with the president is that the fight against corruption is not only a legal fight, it is also a political fight. And that is where the president has been hurt, in the sense that some of these, let's wait till the process is done, which is right, but politically can hurt you, is what has fueled these narratives and has continued to persist. One of the things I always ask myself is that for a president who fought so hard as a candidate to fight corruption, wins the presidency, puts in some of these institutional reforms to fight corruption, happens to also be the presidency under which, if you look at Afrobarometer, we see increased perceptions of institutional corruption, where we see low ratings for the fight against corruption. And for me, that is the point of reconciliation that is needed at some point to be able to understand why these narratives have persisted in spite of these efforts around institutional reforms. And that is what, for me, has really hurt the president when it comes to his standing on the issue of fighting corruption.
I'll be passing the baton to Sweetie Abochi shortly, but I just got curious. Like, you made the valid point. You see, on the part of the generality of the population, we can go to that aphorism: justice delayed is justice denied. So yes, follow the law. No one is saying don't follow the law. But like you said, being over legalistic with the law then simply means we can use the law to nefarious effect and use the same law that is supposed to serve to rather not serve the people. I don't know how you feel about this positioning about, oh, but we must stick to the law vis-a-vis all the stories, accounts, and even you can go to the fourth estate and the latest one it has brought out about Galamsey, which feeds into corruption as well. I don't know what your brief take is on that before Sweetie comes in.
Yeah, so my brief take is that, yes, we must follow the law, but you also have political tools at your disposal that you can use. So, for example, you can say to someone accused or alleged to have been engaged in corruption, you can say to them, look, I'm not saying you're guilty. All I'm saying is that these things can put a stain on my administration. Therefore, in the meantime, maybe step aside, right? Let the investigation finish. If you're cleared, you're more than welcome. I think some of those things could have really helped the president to supplement his legal approach to dealing with the issue of corruption. I mean, remember how swiftly Mr. Edubuahin was let go, right? A few of those situations, I honestly believe, would have helped the president's standing on the fight against corruption.
Right. Thank you, Doug. Let's go to Edem Senanu. Edem, it's good to have you join the conversation. Now, the president is defending his corruption record. He talks about the institutional frameworks, the establishment of the Office of the Special Prosecutor. But when you look at the incidents of corruption that has grappled this current administration and the conclusion or otherwise of it? How would you reconcile what he's saying, defending his record, and the perception that we have? Also on the back that, I think Transparency International current rating for us in terms of corruption is like 78 or so out of 180. How do you reconcile what the president is saying and the current state of in the fight against corruption in the country?
I think that the president needs to face the reality and just accept that the gamut of strategies he has deployed are not effective, have not been effective enough, have not been sufficient enough, have not been strategic enough. I mean, if you took a child to a hospital, let's say with a chest infection, and they gave you some remedies, some medications you take, you went back after a week, it's still the same. Third time, it's the fourth time, and they say, there's been no progress. It tells you that there's a problem with what you're using, as it were, to try and address it. So I'm clear in my mind that, I mean, on the surface of it, the president should understand that, yes, it is not that there have been no efforts, but much more substantively, what has been deployed has not been effective to address it. And that's why our CPI says we've stagnated 43 for 4 years continuously. Stagnation means there's been no progress. And that's the situation we find ourselves in. So it's not been effective. It's not been sufficient. So you need to deploy much more. It's not been strategic. I mean, I look at some of the things that we are talking about. We've been saying assets declaration regime needs to be fit for purpose for quite a long time. Verification and publication not happening doesn't make that, a useful tool. We've talked about unexplained wealth. We've talked about, I mean, there are all the issues, political party financing. Nobody's talking about that in this election year, even though we know that that's where all the problems start. And I think that the political parties need to look at themselves very critically. They don't seem to be delivering on the mandate or on the aspirations of Ghanaians. And there seem to be internal problems that are spilling over into what we see in the public domain. So I think that the president is not keeping it real. I don't know whether he writes his scripts himself or who writes it. They're not doing a favor to Ghana. They're not doing us. They're not standing us in good stead by the way they're approaching this. It's important that from time to time, the president is seen to be taking proper stock of where we find ourselves, is applying his mind as well as the minds of those experts around him to say, look, this is where we have failed, this is what we can do better. And then you will galvanize the support of the citizens of this nation. And so there's a gap. There's a disconnect between where the president finds himself and what he's saying and the rest of us.
So this gap, Adam, is it the legalistic approach like Dr. John Osai-Kopon is saying, or is it really just the conclusion of the incidents of corruption that we're experiencing and how maybe no prosecution takes place? I mean, yeah, just the conclusion of these incidents. Is that the gap?
Well, it is legalistic. It is also because they are not keeping it real. And unfortunately, that posture is becoming common among political party faithfuls, where, we call them the party communicators. They just take a stance irrespective of the real facts on the ground. They are not keeping it real. We can all see that there's been increased reportage of scandals and issues. We can actually take the specific laws that have not provided results. When Cecilia Dapa's issue came up, clearly the gaps within the law and within our institutional arrangements were thrown up as tasks. So somebody speaking to that and saying, look, we noticed this gap. Next time we should do this so OSP could do better, or Yoko should have done that. Then you are showing that, yes, we understand that there is a fight we need to win and that we are bringing our best minds to bear on it. And the strategies we are deploying, we are refining as we go along. We don't see that happening. It's just talking over our heads. So yes, it may be a legalistic approach, but I don't think that's only in it. I think that they are refusing to face the reality. They want to take the position that we are clean, we are doing the best possible, and they keep espousing that. It's almost as if a lie often repeated becomes the truth. But that's not it. A lie often repeated becomes like the truth. It is not the truth. And so we are all clear in our minds that this is not working, and they need to go back to the drawing board and come and keep faith, be real with the people of Ghana.
Right. Benjamin, realistic gaps in the approach to the fights of corruption?
Well, the president has said that a lot of resources have been committed to actually fighting corruption. Of course, we've seen the establishment of the Office of the Special Prosecutor. Let's listen to what Mr. President had to say. Then we'll come back to you for your reflections. And then we'll also talk about the Conduct of Public Officers Bill. But for now, what did Mr. President say?
The Conduct of Public Officers Bill has passed the scrutiny of the Cabinet Committee on Governance and is now ready for presentation to the full Cabinet, after which it will be presented to Parliament for its action. I'm extremely hopeful that this will be accomplished before I leave office. It is also an undeniable fact that budgetary allocations for institutions actively engaged in public sector accountability, that is the Office of the Auditor General, the Judiciary, Parliament, the Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice, RAJ, the Ghana Police Service, the Economic and Organized Crimes Office, EOCO, and the Financial Intelligence Center have all witnessed unprecedented increases since I assumed office in 2017.
Okay, so you heard, Mr. President, there, brief takes on that. So, for example, we have, let me also bring in Professor Kobi Mensah on this bit. Prof, good morning.
Good morning to everybody.
All right, it's good to have you join the conversation. We've already started talking about corruption, so if you have a take, at least from what we've said so far, you can bring it on. But for now, we just heard Mr. President talk about the allocation of resources for fighting corruption, and he talks about the Conduct of Public Officers Bill. A quick thing that comes to mind, especially as he talks about fighting corruption, this would be like something that, yes, we'll do it at the end of our tenure, and maybe it can hang around the neck of the next administration. You know, it leaves a lot to be desired on that front. But what is your take on the fight against corruption, how far we've come, and the relevance of a Conduct of Public Officers Bill as of now?
Okay, thank you and for having me, and good morning to my colleagues on the panel. Now, Benjamin, let's look at what actually fed into the president's political brand before he assumed office. I mean, in this country, obviously, we know that he's a lawyer. We know that he's a consummate human rights lawyer. But also, if you ask in town, a lot of people would also refer to what we commonly say a no-nonsense person, all right? And that's common, knowledge that people would tell you, Nana-Addo doesn't actually entertain, any, what we call behaviors that actually doesn't conform to, the expectations. And so these are some of the, images that are underpin political side. All right. Now, come to job, and you have a complete human right. You have, the president that does not even recognize when people are actually shot dead, what would been coming after the election, 8 were killed. In fact, his administration, some people, prominent people of government, refer to these people as criminals. No action, no word was heard from the president. This is the president who has seen some nebulous policies, all right? You can talk about PDS, you can talk about AJAPA, and nothing was done about it. It simply put it through the legal process to see, the outcome of it. This is the president who was actually, said about that he's in someone's pocket. He referred himself to, the police for investigation. Have we heard the report of that? We haven't actually heard anything about it. So even on the basis of the realistic position, which, John accurately said about, we haven't even seen performance, in that front. So what I'm saying is that the very basis that actually contributed to the Nana-Addo's political brand, in which people had a lot of faith and actually thought that he could be completely different from his predecessor, hadn't actually happened. Look, if you look at Mohammed's administration, there was a talk about a minister wanting to have $1 million. I'm sure you remember that.
Victoria Hammer, right.
All right. But she was moved. You had somebody who was alleged to have done a bad branding of a certain amount of money. Today, it pales in complete shadow. She was removed. But you have a president who people say that he is a no-nonsense person. He will not tolerate any deviant behavior in his government. And he's always saying that somebody has to be put through a certain legal process. Meanwhile, as Judge perfectly articulated, you have other actors under your feet to actually implement, in order that it would conform to the brand expectations of the people who voted you into power.
So that point is clear. But quickly on the point of the Conduct of Public Officers Bill, like I said, how does that resolve this? Too little, too late, or it's good to come at this time?
I think that you're no-nonsense president that people thought you were, which I think John and the others actually articulated effectively. You do not necessarily need to wait for a set public conduct bill, because if somebody would actually do something that would affect the public of the you don't even.
Okay, so Prof, please try to reposition yourself. We'll come back to you. The line is a bit patchy. We'll try to come back to you. Please reposition. Let's see whether the line will be better. But, yeah, Sweetie, he's basically saying that technically for someone like Akufo-Addo, who rode on the no-nonsense, straight-to-the-point, character, you don't need a bill to guide what you're doing. Just go ahead and do it. Don't tell us about a bill that you're going to push for.
But the intersection there is that he's a lawyer, first of all. So the legalistic approach is where I think he thought that was where the battle would be won. But unfortunately, that's not where it has been won. So I think the question I want to ask is, if this bill had been passed, it's been pending since 2008. So we can't just talk about this administration. Mahama's time too, the bill was pending. So if this bill had been passed, would it have kept or would it have solved some of the incidents of corruption or conflicts of interest? I can cite the Smith saga about a cabinet member trying to buy a state institution. Edemson Anu, do you think that this bill, if passed, I mean, the president said it will be passed before his tenure is ended, would solve the problem of corruption?
Well, first of all, the president said he's extremely hopeful, which doesn't give me much hope, to put it bluntly. I would have loved to see a rollout plan, because even a few weeks ago, when on Joy FM I was saying this, the head of their manifesto team said there was no such thing before cabinet. So I'm not too convinced. But to the substantive issues, yes, because there are gaps in our current legal framework that this law would have addressed. Specifically, the Article 284 of the Constitution, that Traj would have been able to use this as grounds to then look at issues that come up with in relation to conflict of interest, find substantive issues with people who, engage in conflict of interest without, as it were, declaring their interest. It would have addressed the gaps in asset declaration, because there's a substantive part there also where we try and improve on what we have existing at the moment. And other elements as well. So we are not just talking about Kupu for the sake of it, but it is because within the current space, many of the cases that go to court, they suffer because there's not a clear understanding of what are the sanctions, what has gone wrong, and how do we, find the person guilty. So Kupu is very important if we're going to make progress, especially in the anti-corruption space.
Right. Let me throw this question to Dr. John Osai-Kwapong. Doc, what's your take on this passage of this Kupu bill? Would it solve our problem? Briefly, and then we move on to other matters.
I mean, it would go a long way to really help. At this point, any tools that we can come up with, any tools, any additional tools that can help in the fight against corruption, I would say, why not give it a shot? Why not try?
Okay, so it looks like this is probably the key to Ghana's quest to fight corruption, Benjamin.
Maybe one of the keys, not the whole key, but maybe one of the keys. Adam Senanu, we are grateful for your time this morning. He, of course, is an anti-graft campaigner as well. He joined us for this conversation.